Okay, well, we are good to go. Good afternoon, everybody. We are live here with another, what we're calling the Born Again series, just looking and talking to Christians that are faithful, committed, have shown a life service to the Lord, and are and how they became Christians. Now, I will say kind of up front that the one that we have today is a little bit different than the other ones we've done, and that is a good thing, I think. Steve Grimes, he's one of the elders at the congregation where I preach, Monroe Valley Church of Christ, and Steve didn't come from out in the world. He was raised in a family of Christians with that influence very early on, and I'll let him talk in more detail about that. But you know, one of the things that can be a bias that we have is that we think that if you are raised in a Christian home, that you have it easy somehow, or that it is, that there aren't any struggles. It just kind of comes naturally, but that's not always true, and perhaps it's never true. The struggles are there, and you still have to make it your own. And so we wanted to talk about that and talk about the benefits of that, of being raised by Christian parents in a Christian home. And because even for those of us, for me, I wasn't raised in that, but I have my own children now, and I want them to be raised in that. And so we want, for those Christians who are now raising kids, even if we came from outside of the Lord's body, we want to be able to instill in our own kids. And so hearing from people who've been through that, I think, can be really beneficial. So I am really grateful that Steve was willing to come and talk about that. So Steve, thank you. And I know that tech is not necessarily your favorite thing, so I appreciate you doing it anyways.
Well, hey, it's good to be here, Scott. This is really a beautiful opportunity. And when you say tech is not my thing, that's probably true. I have to say I'm 75 years old. And when you said Zoom 75 years ago, I think it might have meant that was a train that didn't stop at the depot and kept going by. It zoomed on by. So that gives you an idea how far back I go. But anyway, yes, I was telling you earlier that actually, if I look backwards, I can go backwards 3 generations, follow 3 generations back, where my family has been involved in the church, or members of the Church of Christ. Wow. And so in a way, that's something that maybe you could take comfort in, and it is. It's a great thing, it really is. But as we were talking, it's kind of like Paul when he said, is there any advantage to being a Jew? And his answer was yes, in every way. But that doesn't give you a right to passage, and it also means that it doesn't lessen your responsibility for your obedience to God. So I'm going to give you a history of my life, and I got to tell you right up front, I've thanked God many times for the wonderful life I've had. That I had wonderful parents, and you see as we go over this, you'll understand a little bit more hope about how I was raised. And it doesn't mean that we didn't have problems, that everything was solved. We had problems. But I did have some advantages too, and which I'm very thankful for. So anyway, I'll just start out. I want to tell you about, as I said, I was born into a Christian home, and from the time I was a little boy, the first things I can remember about Christianity is going to sleep in my mom's arm at church, and so it's a wonderful memory. I was raised in a rural Illinois town, a little town, in fact, not in the town, but out on a farm. And it was a very conservative community. And so that right there tells you something about the background. And for the church historians out there, I might tell you that in Jacksonville, Illinois, which is about 40 miles from where I was raised, is a town where Barton W. Stone preached, and he lived there. So for those that's taken church history, you'll recognize that name, and consequently, his influence probably had a lot of influence in Pike County. That's the county I was raised in. So that kind of gives you a history of the community. But as I say, being raised, born into a Christian family and a very conservative family, and there was never any question. We went to church every Sunday. That's just the way it was. That's.
Did that start with your parents, or did it go further back to your grandparents? I mean, how far back exactly?
Well, a good question. It went to my grandparents, and then from them, it went on back to my great-grandparents, and I can't trace it back further than that, but my great-grandparents were in the church. They were members of the church, and that would have been about the time of Barton W. Stone. So,
wow.
And then my grandparents, and I can't say this for sure, but as well as I know, my grandmother was the one that influenced my grandfather, and their name was McCann, into becoming a member of the church. And it's true of my mother as well for my dad. My dad wasn't a Christian until actually after I was born. That wasn't baptized until after I was born. We'll talk about that a little bit. But anyway, my mother was a very determined person, and so we went to church every Sunday. And
okay, so when you were a kid, to start with, at least your mom, grandma, back several generations there, but your dad was not a Christian yet.
No, he was not. He was born in a local family, well known in the community, and no, he was not a Christian at that time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so anyway, as I said, going to church was just a way of life. That's what we did. That was understood. And most of the time, as far as back as I can remember, my dad generally always went. But as I say, I do remember as a small boy when he was baptized. It's a very happy time for my mother because as you understand, as being a Christian, to live in a home where they're not both Christians, mother and father, that's difficult. But you know, when he was baptized, it was better and life was good. And so my mom was very religious. She was just a very passionate person about it, and there was never any question, you know. And I was going to tell you this later, but I just want to tell you something about how my mom, to give you a feel for it. She was very welcoming to anybody. I mean, as a kid, we had any of the nephews or nieces of hers that came into town. They generally stayed at our house, and even visitors and so on. But I was telling Pam earlier, there's three things that you could expect from mom. First of all, you would have some good home cooking. That was always there. And secondly, he would make a bed for you. There's always a place for you to sleep. He was always very welcoming. And then whether you're spending the night, an hour, a day, or what, you can pretty much expect that you're going to be sitting down at the table discussing something about the Bible. It's just the way it was. He always found a way to lead people into talking about the Bible. So it's just kind of interesting. That was her form of doing things. So anyway, I probably will bring more into about her later on. And she was very passionate about the Bible. She's very passionate about her family. And, she grew up in a family of 10, her included, 10 kids. And it was in a very poor circumstance. My cousin, he described it this way: they never knew when the Depression hit because nothing changed. Yeah. And so I wish I could show everybody out there where they were raised. It wasn't a 3-bedroom house. It was a 3-room house. And, the boys had to leave early. I mean, at 16, they were kicked out of the house. But we'll talk about that. If I don't get back to that, you remind me, because I told you I had some percentages I wanted to tell you about. But anyway, my dad, to just describe him, he was a very kind man. He was very soft-spoken, almost never saw him bad. And so he was just a good dad. I love my dad. He taught me a lot. He was just a kind man that taught me a lot, and a lot of good positive things. But as I said, religious-wise, that came from my mother, her passion for it. And again, to say, he not only influenced me, but she influenced him as well. So that's just a really good thing, positive thing to say. Life at home, it was a safe home. And as I said, I've been so thankful for this throughout my life, but it was a safe home. I love coming home at night. I mean, I did spend night with friends and so on, but I knew where my bed was, and to come home, and you always felt safe, loved. It was always there for me to come home to. And I really think that kept me out of some trouble. Not that could have gotten me in a lot of trouble. It could have, but I didn't need to stay out and go out and do things that young guys did, teenagers and so on. Come time to go home, I was ready to go home, and I was happy to go home because it was just a great place to go to. And I had a
So
couple of.
it wasn't just safe. What you're describing is not just a safe place, which is huge in and of itself, but you enjoyed home. That's what you're telling me. You enjoyed being around your family, being around your parents, being around your siblings.
Yeah, oh, loved it. Yeah, I loved it. And I, although my dad wasn't a Christian, well, till later on in life, and it wasn't.
Okay.
I can say it wasn't maybe his. Well, he just didn't have the strong point there that my mother did. But I love being with my dad. I love being with him. I wanted to be with him as much as possible. And being a farmer, and this is something that probably is very unusual in present day life, but being a farmer, I got to go with him a lot. I mean, of course, I wasn't there in school, and as a little kid, if he, there was things that he did when I was a real little boy that were unsafe. And I can just remember crying because I couldn't go with him that day. So, basically he didn't want me around because he was doing things that were unsafe and he wouldn't have to look after me then. I was too.
Right. He didn't want to watch you while he was doing it. Yeah.
That was good. That was really good. That's just one of the really positive things I remember. And as I said, I had a couple of 3 close friends, and all of them were members of the church at that time, and that was really good. And I grew up in a little school. That's where I went to grade school, and I think we had 20 or less in our class. So so anyway. Very good situation, and just a lot of pluses, a lot of Sunday school classes. Sunday morning we went to into our classes, and a lot of training that way that's very positive. If you're not raised in the church, you have to come back and pick that up. But a lot of the Old Testament stories, a lot of that kind of history, of course, that was taught, from those classes. So a lot of pluses there. And just to give you a feel for baptism, so, you think, okay, it can become, this is what you do because this is the way I raised, and this is what happens. But it really wasn't that way for me. I mean, I was ready, and I knew what I was doing, and it was a very special thing for me. So at 14, I was baptized, and had a cousin from California that was staying with us then. And so he kind of gave me a little push, and said, Steve, you need to do this. But it was a very special time in my life, as it was for, that everybody that is baptized, even later on in life when you get associated with the church. A guy by the name of Gilbert, Brother Gilbert. And this is the way it would be in the Midwest at this time. Preachers would come into town and they would preach a 2-week meeting. So that means every night for 2 weeks, we would be having church. And so it was during this time, it was in the August, and that was 61 years ago, I think that's right. And I was baptized, went out in the creek, and the cars would line up and try to get close to a pool that's deep enough to baptize in. And this was right next to the train depot, by the way. But anyway, and you would see at night here, all these cars were shining their lights down on the this pool or wherever it was if they get close enough in the creek. And always felt bad for the preacher because he was the guy that did it, and he's out there in a stick trying to find a place deep enough. And maybe the creeks aren't the most pleasant then. But anyway, that was baptism, and just something interesting. A 2-week meeting. I was telling Pam, this guy, he carried cards, and I wish he still had them. And, little calling cards weren't that common then, so he gave me a card after I was baptized. And it had a picture of a hearse, a black hearse on there, and it said, don't wait for the hearse to take you to church. And I don't know, did you get that?
And you still remember that?
So, oh, absolutely, yeah. It was just, it would be something to pass out.
Yeah.
Cliche to say.
So when you're baptized at 14, you said you had a cousin who is in town, kind of gave you that little push. First of all, do you remember what the push was? Like, was it just, hey, and you're old enough, or was there more to it?
I think that it's, you understand what you need to do. And he was saying, Steve, it's time for you to be baptized. And it was my decision. Don't get me wrong. It was totally my decision. I never have had any second guessing on that. It was totally my decision. And so so nobody had been baptized in the meeting yet. And that was a big thing. People came in and sometimes they'd have 5, 10 baptisms, sometimes not that many. But I think I was the first one at that meeting, and I think a couple others after that. And so I'm the first one of my friends that were my age. So anyway, it was, as I said, it was a very special time, very special event in my life, of course. And I'll talk about that. There were two owning it times in my life, and I really felt like this was one of them. And I'm going to tell you about the other one later on here as we go through. But anyway, high school, I thought I might talk a little about that because high school was a little bit different. We went from a little community of 500 to, I think there was about 3,000 in the county seat, and that was like 15 miles away. And so I was with a new group of kids and everything, but it was good. And but just to let you know, you have to realize, again, you're born into this family and it's very close knit, and going outside is kind of a new experience every time and new exposure, and much different than today. I didn't know how to order a hamburger when I was 10 at a restaurant or anything like that. We didn't go to restaurants. That's just kind of the way it was. And so anyway, I got out of high school, and so it was a decision in life then that in some ways you don't have to make today, but my mom, she would love for me to go on to a Bible school. And so I sent and I got a registration for Florida College. And this was kind of in the infancy of Florida College, I would have said. But I thought, well, I might do this. And then I realized I would only get started, and then I was going to have an obligation coming up with the military. And I thought, this is just not going to work. So I got a temporary job that turned in a little more than a temporary job. It lasted a little longer. I finally wound up going to trade school 500 miles away, and that was a big, 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 big step. And so I wound up in trade school. I got out of trade school and I worked at my trade for just a few months. And then that call came for the military. And in a way, this was a pretty big wake up call because, and it wasn't different than it was for a lot of other kids, but here I was raised in this very small community, and now all at once you're just going out there and you're in the middle of something totally new. And so let me just inject here, my faith played a big part in those 2 years. And so basically I went from going to church every Sunday, that was just a way of life, to I didn't go, I couldn't go. Maybe in some of the training I went a little bit to general Protestant services, and then overseas, once in a while when we were, in at battalion headquarters, they would have general Protestant services. But for me, it was just a great opportunity to sit there and just be quiet and to think about, Christianity, religious things, and so on. So that was a big, big thing in my life. It was a big change, and all at once you're in front of the world. You're exposed to temptations that you never could see before, and so something to think about. And maybe if my parents had shortcomings, and they did, I mean, they weren't perfect, but I might like to have been exposed to the world a little bit more. I mean, understood a little bit more about it, but they didn't know either because they were raised in this community. So, and I think
that
today,
was no, I didn't mean to cut you off. So go right ahead. I'll ask it in a sec.
okay, well, today that would mean streetwise, and
Okay.
I'm not saying train your kids to be streetwise. I'm saying help them to understand the dangers in all of this. And so,
Yeah.
I'll go ahead.
Well, I was just say that, one of the things that I think is maybe a little different is what you're describing is you're raised in a home that puts God first, which is
Yes.
tremendous. And then you go out into the world
Mhm.
and have to face that. Whereas many times when we talk about somebody's conversion story, we're really saying the opposite. They were out in the world and then they came into a world where Christ came first and there was morals and ethics and a Bible-based way of living. So for you, that must have been a pretty big shock to the system to go from where everybody around you wants you to succeed in your faith to then you join the military, which I guess for those watching, what were you drafted for?
Well, I was drafted into the Army, and
Okay, in Vietnam, right?
yes.
Yeah.
The year in Vietnam was probably the hardest because well, like Steve Wilkes, he got out and went to China, and I don't want to insinuate anything because Steve told his story, but there is exposure. Then you get out, you're on your own.
Yeah.
And so a couple things I'll just inject here. I want to inject them anyway, but first of all, well, the background was tremendous. And I think Steve indicated that too. His background, although you get off track and the engine gets, the train gets off the track, but you know where the track is and what you want to get back to. So when you train up a child in the way should go when he is old enough, that really fits in that way because, there's times even after you're raised like this, that the train gets off track, you make mistakes. But, I always knew where I wanted to get back to. I had that grounding, that faith behind me to try to get back there. And then the other thing I wanted to say about this is being raised that way. And one thing that really helped me, and this was big for me, I don't know how it'll be for others, but I always had this question in my mind: what do I want to be doing in 10 years? Where do I want to be? Am I going to be a faithful Christian? Am I going to live a life and so, and picking up some habits. And I just remember, I'll just say smoking, for instance. And, my dad smoked, by the way. It was really common at that time. But, one day I had to ask myself, do I want to do this the rest of my life? That was in Vietnam. Do I want to do this the rest of my life? Is this the direction I want to go? And I guess it's just a direction check. And as a Christian, I just think that's a good kind of a motto to go by and ask yourself, as a young man, young woman, where am I headed? Where am I going to be in 5 years? Where am I going to be in 2 years? Am I going to be somewhere out here in the street? Am I going to be, doing the right thing? So just as a correction check.
Do you feel like that time period in your life of joining the military, kind of being off on your own, I mean, really on your own now, because you've not just left home, you've left the country and everything. Was that a pretty kind of formative time of you deciding what kind of Christian you were going to be? I mean, do you look back at it that way?
Yes, in a way. As I said, it was just exposure to so many things, and not just temptations, but hard way of life, and so you know, there's a question you asked about, was there a certain verse? And I may have told you this before, but Psalms 19:14, let the words of my mouth and meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my God, my Redeemer. So this, I mean, I carried a Bible with me, always had it with me. It's always in my duffel bag, and I drug it around, and it went everywhere. But I had that written in the front of it, and that was just, I always figured if I could control my speech and my thoughts, things were going to be okay. And so
Wow.
that was a big one. And so anyway, I use that kind of as a motto. And but you know, being exposed to things that I'd never been exposed to before, and they were temptations, and you know, I didn't do it all perfect. Don't get me wrong, I didn't do it all perfect. But I think the main thing again is I knew where I wanted to get back to. I knew my roots. I knew I had a faith that I had grounded enough that I always wanted to get back to that. So anyway, go ahead.
That idea of having a motto verse, I think more of us could do that, honestly, to just find some basic text that you go, I get what that says, and then just use that, like you said, as kind of a compass check for ourselves. Say, okay, am I doing this? Is my speech right? Are my thoughts right? And if not, how do I course correct and get back? Sometimes I think we overcomplicate it. You know, one verse well applied can go a long way.
Well, I would encourage anybody to do that. Get a model or a guide from God's Word, and yeah, and it is something to just keep that right in there and firmly implanted. So I might go on here, give you a little bit more background. Anyway, I of course got back from the military and met my wife, and that's a really a beautiful story. But we don't have time to, and that's not what we want to talk about today. I've been married for 52 years. That's 52 years ago. And Pam and I lived in Illinois for 4 years. Now, for those that know me, Pam and I have a kind of a mutual, we have mutual things in Illinois. Her mom was raised in Illinois. So, and then it goes as far back that actually we have great grandparents the same. Now, before everybody jumps out of their seat and say you're not first cousins, when you start figuring it out, it's so many times removed and it's so far back that probably a lot more people are married closer than that. So
yeah,
it's a common thing that we had together. But 48 years ago, we made a very big decision in our lives. We moved from Illinois to the Northwest. And of course, that's where she was from. And I have to say, that was probably one of the best decisions I ever made in my life. And it had some adventure to it because, you know, hey, I'm pulling up strings, I'm moving out here and quitting my job, and it had scary parts to it, some unknowns, but it was exciting. And when I came out, I said, okay, if we can't find a church, I'm going to get some stuff and we're going to start a church out there. And so that was the attitude. We brought some songbooks, and I talked to one of the elders there, and I said, yeah. He said, well, yeah, here you go start one out there. Had no idea, none about the church out here or anything. And so anyway, I thought, well, I'll start a new work. So when I first got out here, I came out and I thought, well, I'll go 2 or 3 places and just to see if I can find something the way, you know, what I'm looking for. And I think we went to 2 Sundays, different places, and we wound up going to a place in Ballard, which is called the North Seattle Church of Christ. And took one time and I figured out this is where I want to be. And Radke was there, Jerry McDonald was there, and kind of a funny story. I said, I'm here from Illinois. And he said, oh, you know Lowell Williams. And I'm thinking, wait just a minute, who's Lowell Williams? I don't know. Well, he's from Illinois, you're from Illinois. And I think, well, there's 3 or 4 or 5 million people back there.
You say it's a pretty big state over there. You don't know everybody.
Well, anyway, it's kind of a funny story, but we went there for several months, and I'm telling you, uh, it was just, it just got us started, and we moved to the east side then. Jobs and just the opportunities happened, and you hear providence of God. I don't know, but it was so good, and we were preparing to build a house down in Redmond. Found this house that turned out to be 10, 15 blocks from where the church was in North Seattle, or in Kirkland there, up on Rose Hill. And we were there 18 years. I got the classes. It was my answer to wanting to go to Christian college. It was just I got the religious part of it, and the academics didn't weren't there. But man, it was such a great 18 years, just 18 years, and so we lived there, and of course didn't totally stop there. We moved into and lived in Bothell, close to where the church is on 140th now, in Kirkland, where they moved to from Rose Hill. And then, as you know, we've been in Monroe for 25 years. So that kind of takes you up to the present time. So
Yeah. So you look at it and you think about becoming a Christian, because I guess there's two ways to look at this, and what we're trying to focus on is people becoming Christians. But I guess maybe one thing to point out with, for those who are raised in Christian homes, becoming a Christian is maybe more of a natural part of the process, but then sometimes we call it making it your own. You have to make it your own. You have to leave mom and dad's house and their influence, which has been positive, and then decide, I'm going to do this anyways. What were the things for you that helped you to make it your own, so that for you it was it made that transition from mom and dad's faith to Steve's faith?
Well, of course, baptism was, that was the big, I told you there were two events in my life that really made it my own. And I had training as a Christian in the small community back there, but never like it was when I got to Rose Hill and started taking classes there, and with Lowell teaching. And that was my second. It was, wow. I remember taking Acts for the first time, and I think Jim Putterball taught it then. And I thought, oh yeah, hey, I know what Acts 2:38 says, and I know this, and I know that. And all at once, it's like a slap in the face. Wait just a minute, I didn't know about this journey of Paul, and I don't have these details. So, and then you start to realize, I think that was really a making it my own. It was just an eye-opening thing to really study God's word in the fashion that I had the opportunity to there with Lowell. And so great, just great.
So really for you, aside from baptism, the second piece of it was, maybe for me to kind of summarize, and you could tell me if I'm saying it wrong, is when you decided to become really involved in personally studying for yourself. I'm going to find answers. I'm going to make sure I know why I believe what I do. And you did that investigation through, and in your case, that happened through a lot of classes and opportunities that existed at the time there with the congregation that you were a part of. So is that a fair way to put that?
Absolutely. It was a real fair way. I think being raised the way I was, you kind of inherit maybe the feeling, okay, we got it. We're the ones, and you don't need to really do all this studying to make it your own, as I'm describing. And so maybe the downside, my mother, she did it herself. That woman, I'm telling, she knew her Bible. I wish she could sit down with you and just, she loved it. She loved it. And she studied, she just studied a lot. And so I know that's the way she did it, but I had the advantage of having these classes. And then you start to realize, wait just a minute. I thought that I knew the Bible. I thought that I understood all the Bible says. And of course, then all at once a big door opens up to you. And I think that in that way, the conversions that you've talked about before are a lot similar. when that door opens up and you take a look and think, wow, this is God's word. This is true. This is what the Bible says is true. It's not that I didn't believe it before, not that I didn't accept it and everything, but it's just a whole big door that opens up to so much more. And then as you look at it, you still think, I don't know it all today. There's still a great big door. So.
I think there is something to that point when you begin to look and realize for yourself. I think it's the Psalms that says, open my eyes that I may behold wonderful things or wondrous things in your law. When you start to go, oh, wow, there's some really powerful things in here that I didn't even know. I mean, maybe I knew the stories, right? Because you go to Bible classes as a kid and you learn about Jonah and the big fish, and you learn about Noah and the ark, and those are all valuable. I mean, I in no way am I saying that that's not important. But then when you begin to take it to the next step, when you start to ask the questions, well, what can I learn from Noah and the ark, and what was actually going on there about God's character with Jonah and Nineveh and things like that. So,
kind of, it reminds me, Scott, of Hezekiah. Am I right? That found the law, and so when he found the law and really started looking at it, I mean, that must have been an eye opener for him. Hey, we're not doing this right, and So
when you start reading it for yourself, and I think maybe it's like King Josiah you're talking about there. And
no, I'm sorry, Josiah. Yes.
But
I'm sorry.
Hezekiah was pretty good too. One of my favorite things with Hezekiah was when he just took that letter and just opened it up and laid it before God and said, "This is what the king has said, and I leave it to you." So Hezekiah and Josiah, both pretty good kings, but I know what you mean. When you read it for yourself and it's no longer hearsay or just this is what mom and dad said, that's where it begins to change. And with I guess one thing I would like to ask you, because one way to put the reason I wanted to have Steve was because when I look at my family and where I want it to be several generations from now, I want it to model what Steve's family is. This just multiple generations of people who genuinely love the Lord, not just because their parents did it, but they really, truly made it their own. Because at this point, Steve, you said you trace it backwards, 2-3 generations, but now past you've got kids and grandkids that are faithful, and that's what it's all about. So,
no, absolutely.
I guess, Steve, since I've got you here and you're kind of stuck, what should we do? As a man who was raised by Christians and then has the generations past him who have chosen to have that same faith dwell in them. I think of Timothy with the faith that dwelt in his mother and grandmother first.
Sure.
What should we be doing as parents so that we give our kids the best shot for that? What's your advice?
Okay, I got a list of whole things here. I know we're not going to have time for all of them, but how much more time do we have? Because I want to give you a history of my mom's family. So, and
we've got time. We got time. Don't you worry about it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's. What should we do first? Well, I got this list here. Let's just look at it. First of all, understand, when you became a Christian or people that weren't raised in the church, and it's kind of a automatic, you think, okay, I'm going to raise my kids in the church, and this is just natural. Everything's going to work out, and there's a lot of truth to that, and that's the right way to be. But I think I said this before. There are no free passes. In other words, you can say, I'm going to make my children Christians. You can't. There's no way. But you can give them all of the background, everything, put it down for them to help them make that decision on their own. But there are no free passes. And I'd say do it God's way. And in today's society, it's just, everyone wants to do it another way than God's way. And you know, one man, one woman family, and let little boys be boys and girls be girls. And I got to be careful what I say here, but God's way is always right. And when you're raised in the church and you realize that, God's way is the right way. And you know, it doesn't mean that we're going to be perfect, but God's way is the right way. And I wrote down some cliches. We say, well, sometimes you got to let them sow the wild oats. I was raised on a farm. When we prepared a field to plant, we didn't plant wild oats. We planted oats. And so, you know, make sure that that doesn't have to happen. They don't have to sow their wild oats. You make sure they sow the right oats. And then we say, well, just let them alone. They'll grow out of it. Well, no, don't let them grow into it. That's my philosophy. Don't take this position. Well, they will grow out of it. No, just don't let them grow in it. And then I told you this before. This was really big with me. Make sure they ask themselves, where am I going to be? And maybe you need to remind them of that, to ask them, where are you going to be in 5 years or 10 years? Is this the way you want to go? And another one, and this is something that some of the older ones out there will remember, Doris Williams. And this is something that my wife got from her class, but say yes when you can, because so many times as Christians, and it's everything's no to your kids. No, you can't go there. No, you're going to get in the car and go down here and get a hamburger with a boy. No, no, everything's no. And if there's times you can say yes, and I'm not saying say yes when it's wrong or bad or going to be harmful for them, but if you can say yes, then they don't live in a world that everything is no to them. And so look for those times when you can be positive. I've remembered that, and it's always a big. Maybe, and this is, I said something that I didn't get as much as I thought I should, but prepare your kids for the big world out there. And that's hard to do because you don't want them to be involved in it, but still they need to know a little about it. And as I say, I kind of got pushed into a big world, and all at once I'm there, and then you got a lot of choices to make. So if you can help them before they get there. And another big one, and if you want to butt in any time here, stop me, but another
this is good.
Okay, well, another big one is talk to your kids. And this is probably something I didn't do as much as I should, but to go all the way back to my home life, every night we sit down to supper, and it's dinner here, so you sit down to dinner, but every evening, and generally all 5 of us, I have a brother and a sister, sat there, and we had a conversation over dinner, and we talked. And a lot of times it was about animals, livestock on the farm. It was about dogs. It was about people. It was everything. And I think that was good, and sometimes even about religion. But yeah, we talked a lot. And, okay, I'm going to get myself in trouble here, but I'm going to tell you something. Before my first child was born, that was, of course, Cindy, but we didn't know it was going to be a boy or a girl. But my wife talked to her all the time in the womb. So I mean, I'm just telling you, they start out talking and they've never stopped. It's communication. Of course, I have 3 girls, but I mean, she talked to Cindy in the womb all the time, and I remember that, and calling her baby and rubbing her tummy and so on. But communication with your kids, and mother and daughter is big, and of course, father and son is big, but mother and daughter is big, and my wife to this day, I mean. Pam, I wake up in the morning sometimes, and she talks one of them to work when she works every day. So I'm laying in bed at 5 or 6 in the morning, and I'm hearing talking down there. And Pam gets up, and she talks her to work. And I mean, she's driving, but she's on her. I'll let you guess which one this was. gone to work. But anyway, that's interesting. And so that communication is very important between mother and child, and father and child too. And I know, I think you said once that the father had, as far as religion goes, 85% of the influence and the mother 15%. And with mine, it was, I mean, that 15% is where I got mine. But I think communication either way. And of course, father and daughter's big, and mother and daughter's big. And so that keep that communication going. And so another one,
Okay.
I'll just a couple more real quick here. And then I got something, we got time?
We got about 5 minutes.
Okay. I never was disrespectful to my parents. You know, some guys, well, that's the old lady at home or the old man. Never, ever, ever. And then, well, we already talked about this. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. And that's getting back on that track. That track is always there. So when the train crashes, you know where the track is. So I want to close because I want to share something with you. And this is kind of, it's just a telling thing. And I want to say this. First of all, I'm not making any judgments on any of my family or anybody. It's just some information that I think is worth sharing. And it gives some points that are very telling. My mother was raised in a family of 10. And out of those 10, they all remained faithful to the Church of Christ. Now, this is the way I understand it, except one. So that's 90%. 90%. Wow. And you say, wow, and it is. Yeah. That's just really telling. But then that was my mother's generation, and I moved to my generation now. This is my cousins. This is all of those 10 kids, their kids. And there was, let's see, 23 then of those cousins. But the percentage then, and these are the kids as I look at it, I'm not judging anybody. I'm just saying, as far as I know, the ones that remained faithful and went to the Church of Christ was 60%. So it goes from 90% to 60%. And then we drop down one more generation, and this is just almost scary. And again, let me put this disclaimer in here. It's getting of those 10 kids, they scattered all over the United States. But then it goes down, and there was 41, and 25% are still faithful to the Church of Christ, and 75 no. So that's
it goes from 90 to 60 to 25 as the generations progress, is what you're saying.
Yes, isn't that interesting? It's scary.
It is.
It's interesting to look at it that way. And I think you and I might have said something about this, but if every one of the families could bring their children to Christ, as the church would grow tremendous. I've looked at it over my lifetime and think, if my family all remained faithful and then their families all remained faithful, think about the growth of the church. But the sad thing is there's a telling story there. So.
Well, and it goes to tell, there's kind of that old saying that God has no grandchildren, that ultimately everybody has to, in their own generation, for themselves choose it. And being raised by Christian parents isn't the answer to everything. It is a benefit. It's a good foundation. I mean, I certainly hope so. Bible certainly points that direction. That's what I'm doing with my kids. So I hope I'm in the right course of action. Right. Mm-hmm. But it isn't everything. Free will does still exist, and people have to make choices for themselves. And so, yeah, that is kind of interesting. And like you said, you can't ever make a judgment on somebody's soul, but you can look at the fruits that are born out from one generation to the next and say, oh boy, that's a telling thing. And well, thank you, Steve. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this and talk with me. It has been fun. I've enjoyed it. I hope you have, and I know it'll be a benefit to others as well. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in and watching. Next week, we won't be live next week. We're going to do a pre-recorded one because we've got a couple who are going to do it, but they have a little one, and we're going to try and record it when the little one is asleep. But Theo and Heather Heinrichs are good friends of my family, wonderful people, and we're hoping to have a chance to talk to them about how they became Christians. And Theo and Heather, especially, their stories are pretty cool. It's pretty cool people. So we're looking forward to doing that, and we'll post that on Thursday at about the same time, 3 o'clock. So you can look for it then. It won't be live, but it'll still be available. So thank you so much. And thank you, Steve, once again, very much for taking the time.
It's great.